What happens when the world's second largest economy builds millions of homes that nobody can live in? What happens when families invest their entire life savings into apartments that will never be finished? Right now, China is facing the largest real estate collapse in modern history. A crisis so deep it threatens not just the future of its people, but the stability of the entire global economy. This is the story of how China's dream of endless growth turned into the biggest ticking time bomb of our century, and why it could explode sooner than anyone thinks. China's transformation is one of the most breathtaking stories of modern history. In just a few decades, it leapt from poverty to becoming the world's second largest economy. The world watched in awe as cranes dotted the skyline, highways stretched across the land, and skyscrapers rose from the dust. Real estate wasn't just construction, it was the heartbeat of a nation. Families saw apartments not only as homes, but as a path to wealth, a way to secure their children's future. With few alternatives for investment, the housing market became the ultimate savings account. By the 2010s, nearly 70% of household wealth in China was tied to property. Developers grew into giants. Evergrande, Country Garden, and dozens of others built entire cities seemingly overnight. Local governments sold land to fund their projects. Investors lined up, convinced prices would only go higher. People bought second, even third homes, often leaving them empty, waiting for their value to climb. But beneath the glittering towers, cracks were forming. Entire districts stood silent, built for people who never came. Ghost cities, with miles of empty towers and deserted streets, became symbols of excess. Debt piled higher and higher, and the illusion of unstoppable prosperity was becoming fragile. The turning point came in 2021. Evergrande, burdened with more than $300 billion in debt, admitted it could not pay. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that sent shockwaves across China. Suddenly, millions of families who had prepaid for apartments realized construction would never finish. They were left paying mortgages on homes that existed only on paper. Across the country, anger boiled. Protests erupted outside government offices and bank branches. Ordinary people, young couples, parents, retirees stood in the streets demanding justice. Their dreams had turned into concrete shells. Developers began collapsing one after another. Country Garden, once considered stable, fell into crisis. Thousands of unfinished projects littered the nation. Entire communities had invested everything into apartments that would never see the light of day. The impact spread beyond housing. Construction workers lost their jobs. Factories producing steel, cement, and furniture shut their doors. Youth unemployment soared above 20%. For many young Chinese, the future felt uncertain, even hopeless. Property prices in major cities dropped by 20%, and analysts warned they could fall even further. That might sound small, but when 70% of household wealth is tied to real estate, even a slight decline erases trillions in savings. Families who once felt secure suddenly faced financial ruin. Local governments, dependent on land sales for as much as 40% of their revenue, saw their budgets collapse. With developers gone, their main source of funding dried up. Public services weakened, debts grew heavier, and the entire system began to strain. This is not just an economic crisis. It is a human tragedy. The dream that fueled China's rise has turned into a nightmare for millions. What makes this story even more alarming is that it will not stay confined to China. The crisis has the potential to shake the entire world. China consumes half of the world's steel and cement. A collapse in its property sector means demand for raw materials plummets, hitting exporters from Australia to Brazil. Global financial markets, already fragile, tremble as investors realize billions of dollars tied to Chinese real estate may never be recovered. Western companies, from luxury brands in Europe to tech giants in America, face shrinking demand from Chinese consumers. And beyond economics lies psychology. For decades, the world believed China's growth was unstoppable, a force of nature. The unraveling of its property sector shatters that belief. Confidence is fragile, and once it breaks, panic spreads quickly. Beijing is fighting desperately to contain the damage. Interest rates are being cut, banks are pressured to lend, and local governments are buying unfinished projects to keep them alive. Yet each solution only deepens the problem: more debt, more artificial support, and still no real demand. Economists warn of a Japan moment, a replay of the 1990s when Japan's property bubble burst and the nation entered 3 lost decades of stagnation. And then comes the silent threat: deflation. Prices falling, wages shrinking, and people holding back their spending. Already, consumer prices in China are slipping. Combine this with a shrinking population, fewer workers, fewer young buyers, more retirees, and the picture becomes even darker. The very engine that once powered China's rise is slowing permanently. For the world, the implications are immense. Volatility in global stock markets, a surge in gold as investors flee to safety, slower growth across the West, pressure on jobs, pensions, and savings. The reality is simple: China's crisis will not remain in China. It will ripple across every continent. If this story feels familiar, it should. In 2008, the United States faced its own housing collapse. Subprime mortgages triggered the downfall of Lehman Brothers, the freezing of global credit, and the worst financial crisis in generations. Back then, the world learned how deeply interconnected financial systems had become. A housing crash in one country toppled banks in another. Governments scrambled to bail out their economies. Millions lost their homes, their jobs, their savings. China's crisis is different in scale, but the echoes are hauntingly similar. Empty apartments instead of subprime mortgages, developers defaulting instead of Wall Street banks, a government struggling to balance rescue with reform, and a world holding its breath, knowing that if the second largest economy collapses, no one will escape unscathed. There are three possible futures. The first is stabilization. Beijing steps in more aggressively, pumping trillions into the system, completing unfinished apartments, and propping up local governments. This would buy time, but it doesn't solve the structural problem. The second is stagnation. China avoids total collapse but slips into a slow decline, much like Japan did in the 1990s. Growth stalls, debt lingers, and the miracle economy becomes a cautionary tale. The third, and most dangerous, is contagion. The crisis deepens, consumer confidence collapses, and deflation grips the economy. Global markets crash as supply chains break and demand evaporates. This is the nightmare scenario, the one that could trigger a worldwide recession. Which path China will take remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: the stakes could not be higher. The glittering towers that once symbolized unstoppable progress now stand as warnings, monuments to debt, speculation, and hubris. The question is no longer if this crisis will spread, but when. And when it does, it could redefine the balance of global power for the 21st century. So the next time you see images of China's ghost cities, remember, they are not just empty buildings. They are echoes of a dream gone wrong, and a warning of a storm that may be coming for us all. The towers of China once promised progress. Today they stand as broken dreams, and the next chapter in this story has not yet been written. The only question is, will you be ready when it begins? If this documentary gave you a new perspective, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the forces shaping our financial future.